And returning for his hat-trick of appearances at Silicon Brighton, it's Steve Bustin, a local communications and keynote speaking expert. Steve will be helping us to understand how better to work with our teams remotely. So whether you're used to working with dispersed teams or you're new to the task, Steve's talk will help you go away with the tools to make sure you can do that more effectively.
Hello, it's Steve Bustin from Get Your Voice Heard, and I wanted to talk to you today a little bit about how you communicate with what tends to be referred to as a remote team. Now, we're going to talk about that language in a minute and whether they are remote or not, but what I wanted to do is give you some ideas to maybe freshen up the way that you are communicating with a team that are dispersed, that are spread out. At the moment, we're all working from home, or the vast majority of us are, but this isn't just about lockdown. Because nowadays, more and more teams are spread out. They are working from a number of different offices. They might be working internationally. In fact, sometimes you're now going to have a mixture of home workers and workers based in an office space. And we need to be able to communicate with all of them. They need to feel like part of a cohesive team. So this isn't just about lockdown. This is about communicating with a team that are spread over a number of sites. And these are just tips, ideas, ways to get you thinking. Because I do hear a lot of people saying, oh, but we've got it's all set up. You know, we've got Slack, we've got Zoom, we've got emails, we've got FaceTime, we've got iMessage, we've got Skype. Does anybody actually use Skype anymore? It does seem to have disappeared. Don't know where. But actually, that doesn't necessarily mean that you are a cohesive team. That just means you've got lots of channels to communicate with that team. It also means you've got lots of channels with which to interrupt your team. And again, I'm going to explore that a little bit in this talk because it's important to understand when people want to be communicated with and how people want to be communicated with. Because if you don't get that right, you're not only doing your team a disservice, you're doing your business a disservice. So it's something we need to experiment with. And really what I want to do today is just give you some ideas to freshen up your communications, to get you out of a rut. Make a few changes, but I'd invite you to examine how you currently communicate critically. It's very easy for a leader, whether that's a team leader, whether that's a managing director, to assume that everybody likes communicating in the way that they like communicating. So if you happen to be a great fan of sending people a text message, or you just want to, can we jump on a Zoom call? It's a phrase we're hearing a lot. Just because you like doing that, just because that's your modus operandi, doesn't mean that's true of your team. And actually, yes, your team do get to have preferences as individuals. And we're going to explore that a little bit as well in this session. Because, okay, there are times when you need people to communicate with you in certain ways. But also, if you can find the ways that your team members like to be communicated with, the way they like to communicate back, that actually can set you in really good stead. So the other thing I want to start by saying is, if nothing else, make sure your team have the correct kit to communicate effectively. Make sure they have laptops or tablets that are powerful enough to cope clearly with Zoom, which is becoming a much bigger, a much more processor-heavy software with every single weekly update at the moment. So make sure they've got the kit that can cope for them to communicate in the way that you want them to be able to communicate. If necessary, particularly while people are working remotely, working at home, think about maybe supplying with a mic. Maybe you need to supply them with some lights. The other thing I'd really suggest you do, though, is you supply your team with training. Make sure they have been properly trained, on how to use the software. I mean, with Zoom, it's actually quite a steep learning curve if you haven't used it much, particularly if you're suddenly hosting meetings. So make sure that people have been trained on how to use the software to its maximum advantage, because quite frankly, you're paying for it. The other thing is you're paying for them, your staff, so make sure they have had the training and coaching that they need in how to present online, particularly if they're talking to clients, even more so if they are pitching for work, if they are representing the business to try to bring new business into you. Make sure that people have had training. Just because they've had presentation skills training or coaching doesn't mean that they can make the switch into online presenting that easily. It's quite a different skill set because clearly there's no feedback from an audience. So there are people out there who will obviously will coach your team, and yeah, there's someone quite close to home here who is. It's one of the things I do is I will coach people on how to present online. So let me know if you want more details on that. Anyway, let's dig into the first of the points I wanted to make today. And this is that I don't think you should refer to your team as remote. And it's become a sort of buzzword. People say, oh, you know, we've got a remote team, or we're all working remotely. To me, that says cut off. That says siloed. That says really separate. It doesn't say cohesive team. And I think this language matters. If you, by using this phrase remote, are telling your team, well, actually, you are remote, we're almost holding you at arm's length, I think there's a problem. And I think if you want to build a cohesive team that communicates well together, think of other words. One of the words I'm hearing more and more is about dispersed. We have a dispersed team. I think that's really nice. Or distributed. Interestingly, the team behind WordPress don't have a physical office. They are a distributed team. That is the phrase they use. And I think that's a really nice team. We are distributed widely. And maybe other words you could use, we have a diffuse team. Even just, we're spread out. But one of the words I think you should try and avoid using to refer to your team is virtual. Unless you are working in a virtual reality environment and you all have avatars set up, you're not a virtual team. That again is rather distancing. I think it just sort of says, actually, these aren't real people. These are just avatars. They are people, again, at arm's reach. So think about the language you're using. Don't refer to your team as remote. Don't refer to them as virtual. Think of other words you can use. What suits you and your setup? Because don't forget, this might be national. This might be international. I think you're a dispersed team or a distributed team, diffuse, spread out, something like that. I think it's much nicer words. So the second point I wanted to make is about an important part of communication that tends to get forgotten, and that's listening. Listening is a really vital business skill. It's particularly a vital leadership skill, and it is one that so few people have ever been trained on or have really understood what listening is about. Everybody goes, oh yeah, I listen all the time. But actually, are you really listening? Now, those of you who saw me speak earlier this year at the Silicon Brighton event at Platform 9 in Hove will have seen this. This is the Shannon Weaver model. Now, this is a model of communication that's been around for donkey's years, really since the late 1940s. And it comes in and out of fashion. But I think it's a really interesting way to think about communications. And this forms the basis of a lot of the consultancy work I do with big businesses. Now, it's about having an encoder. So somebody who sends a message, it's encoded in some way through language, through tone of voice. It might be through facial or body language, if somebody can actually see you. There's then a channel, and that's your chosen channel of communication, which might be an email, it might be a Zoom call, it might be a text message, it might be a face-to-face meeting. And then the message is decoded, so the recipient will have their own language and tone of voice and mood and all those things about how they are hearing what you're saying, and then hopefully it reaches the recipient. Now, the two interesting bits here on this model I want to dig into a little bit more. First of all, is this idea of a feedback loop. Now, this is about listening, getting feedback from the person or people that you are talking to. And I would ask you to question, what is your feedback loop? How are you taking feedback? Now, this is true, particularly if you're working with, if you're selling to customers, you need to be listening to those customers through that feedback loop. And it might be that if you're selling to consumers, that is on social media. You're listening to reviews and comments and posts on your social media posts. And that's a really good source of feedback. If you are selling to businesses, that feedback loop is often around customer satisfaction surveys, results-driven, ROI, all those sorts of things. You need to have some channel in place. So when you're talking to a remote team or a dispersed team, again, you need to have a feedback loop in place. How can people feed back to you that they have heard you, that they are listening? Because if they can't feed back to you, you've got no way of knowing that they are listening. So you've got no way of knowing whether they're going to act on what it is you've said or maybe you've asked them to do. So the feedback loop's important. And let's just dig into this idea of listening a bit more, because that's what it's all about. Don't multitask. If you are listening to somebody, do not try and do other things as well. And this, I think, is particularly true on platforms like Zoom. There is a real temptation to be checking other things, to be looking at your emails, to be looking at other messages coming in, all this sort of stuff. If you are listening to somebody, don't do that. take away all the distractions, switch on Do Not Disturb, turn off notifications, put any physical distractions out the way, and just talk to that person. The other thing that I think is important on this is eye contact. Now, most of us will have a webcam at the top of our laptop or clipped onto the top, or maybe you're using a phone or a tablet. Look at the camera as much as you can. Now, inevitably, our eye line wanders a little bit, as it would in normal conversation. If we look straight into somebody's eyes the whole way through a conversation, it can get a bit intense. So try to look at the camera as much as you can. And don't start typing or tippy-tapping on the keyboard. If a person you're talking to can hear it, they know that you're not paying attention. So go full screen, make eye contact with that person, and look at the camera, not just at the eyes of the person you're talking to, because then it'll look as if your eye line is further down the screen, which is distracting. And do not mute yourself or them at any point during the conversation. Muting yourself so that you can be tippy-tapping on your keyboard, it's a distraction. And don't forget, the person you're talking to can see that you are muted. Likewise, if you mute them, you are shutting them up. A normal, natural conversation will flow between the two of you. Now, yes, we know online there can be a slight lag, but you have to deal with that. So make sure that you are listening. You are listening intently and you are listening properly. And actually, I would often try and repeat back the points you have heard that person make to make sure that you've understood correctly. And that goes into this whole encoding, decoding thing, because what they said may not be what you've understood them to have said. So make sure you check before you go on. So that's second point, make sure you're listening. The third point I want to talk about is, or still tied to the Shannon-Weaver model, is this idea of noise or interference. Now, on any conversation, there are always distractions. There are always things that can degrade the quality of your conversation. So when you are dealing with a dispersed team, when a lot of your communication is going to be online, just things like poor tech, a laptop that's not keeping up, poor broadband can really cause a problem. If you are struggling to get bandwidth, just make sure things like cloud-based backups are switched off. If necessary, connect yourself with an Ethernet cable straight to the broadband hub, particularly if you're working at home, rather than using Wi-Fi, because if other people are using the same Wi-Fi, it degrades pretty quickly. So that can be noise. Any distractions are definitely noise. And that could be as simple as other noises going on in the background, other people chatting, can be very distracting and will actually stop effective communication. So think about what distractions are going to be there for you and for your team and remove them. I think another distraction is poorly managed meetings. There's a lot of noise in poorly managed meetings. And here I'm talking about online meetings, really. There's quite often you'll find one or two people are able to dominate an online meeting. It may just be they've got the loudest voice, may just be that they are super confident. And make sure that person who's dominating the meeting isn't you. A lot of people, when they're in a leadership role, will actually speak far more than their team. Try to let the team speak more than you. Be in listening mode, not in talking mode. The other thing around noise or interference is if you're dealing with an international team or an international audience. Now, clearly, there can be language difficulties. There can also be things like time of day. If you're talking to people in Asia or in the US, they can be in a very different time of day to you. There can also be cultural encoding going on. So they're not necessarily going to be understanding the language you use. Maybe you're going to use slang. Maybe you're going to use cultural references that just don't resonate with them. Those count as noise because they will actually stop effective communication. So make sure that you understand what is causing interference, what might be causing a breakdown in your communications, and deal with it as eloquently and elegantly as you can to remove it. So that's point 3. Let's move on to point 4. So the fourth point is that you need to be more than just a good manager or leader. You need to be a decent human being. Empathy is key here. Really, to build rapport, to make a connection, you need to be empathetic with your team members. And you need to be a person, not just the boss and the team member, actually to build rapport, build a relationship with them. And really, as I say, it's about empathy. So when you do speak to them, particularly if you haven't spoken to them for a little while, ask about them. Ask about their lives, particularly if they are perhaps working from home. Maybe they're not seeing huge numbers of people. They actually may be really glad for the opportunity just to have a bit of a chat, to reflect on where they're at, what's going well for them, maybe what's not, but not just about work. Inconsequential is important. Ask them about what they're up to. Ask about their kids. Ask about where they've been, their garden, what they're listening to, what they're watching, all these sorts of things. You're sort of going for the water cooler chat here. That sort of way of building relationships, getting to know somebody a bit better, getting to know who they are, a bit more about their characteristics, that will make it easier to communicate with them on a long term. I would also suggest that part of being a decent human being when you're communicating is to communicate little and often. If people get long gaps between communication, it's actually much harder to then build that rapport. So aim for shorter, more regular conversations, or at least contact. It doesn't even necessarily have to always be the spoken word, but do set out to have regular contact with people. And I would always aim to, keep them or keep yourself up to speed with what they're doing, but also keep them up to speed with what you're doing. Make it a two-way process. Because actually what you're doing is going to impact on what they're doing, and it's part of helping them to feel as if they are part of a coherent team. So talk to them about what what they're up to, how that fits into the broader picture, maybe how it dovetails with what you're doing, how you're going to take whatever they're producing and use it to further the whole team's goals. So ensure that there is a two-way to it on that one. I'd also, at the end of a call, write them a follow-up email, particularly if there's been actions agreed or deadlines agreed, for example. Send them an email just saying, great to talk to you. This is just where I think we're at. This is what I'm looking forward to seeing from you, and this is when. And it just helps to check in, a bit like talking about listening just now. It's that thing about, have you actually heard them? Have they heard you? Has that understanding happened, or has there been encoding and decoding going on? The other important one on this is let the team member finish the call. It should be them who decides when this meeting or this chat is over, rather than you. So it's quite often, if you are suddenly going, right, I've got to go now, there may well be something important that they have been struggling to articulate, or they've been procrastinating about talking about. So always ensure that you have the time to let them take as long as they need to communicate what they need to communicate, and then let them decide that the call is now over and it's ready to ring off. You might need to prompt, is there anything else? What else is going on? That sort of stuff, but let them make that decision. I think that's important. So don't just be a good leader, be a decent human being. Let's move on to point 5. Now, I think a bit of FaceTime is good time. Now, I'm not just talking about FaceTime, the app here. I'm just talking about actually getting face-to-face with people. I think it's important that you get people on camera if you're working as a part of a dispersed team. Some people will be resistant. There are people, I've worked with teams where people are, no, I'm just going to use an avatar. Or I'm just going to have a box with my name in. I would actually go as far as say that is not allowed. It's not often I say that there should be absolutes, but I think that is out of order now. I think we need to be able to see each other. If not, there is a suspicion about what's that person hiding. If you have got somebody in your team who is really, really anti being on camera, maybe talk to them one-to-one, just find out why, if necessary, get them some training. Try and understand what it is that is causing that. It may be that they just feel that actually their home environment, if they're working at home, isn't suitable to be on camera. So maybe you help them think about what they can put in the background, backdrops, all that sort of stuff. So yeah, don't allow hiding to go on, because there is a trust issue starts to become a problem. But I would find out from your team members how they like to be communicated with. They are allowed to express a preference here. If you've got somebody who just loves being on camera, they love chatting around, they love the banter and things, great, go for it. But if you've got somebody who actually prefers stuff in writing, maybe they prefer working on instant messaging, do that from time to time. Doesn't mean to say that you're not going to say once a week, for instance, we need to have a Zoom call so I can see you, but understand that the rest of the time they prefer stuff being written. So think about how they prefer to be communicated with. And it does mean that a one size does not fit all. You may have to be using slightly different channels for different individuals. Clearly there's going to be an overall channel if you've got a group message to get across. But when it comes to that one-to-one interaction, try and find the channel that your team member prefers, and you will get better communication out of them. I'd also encourage them to be in touch with other people, not just with you, because you need the team to be cohesive. You need them to feel they've got colleagues, that they're not just reporting to you, that actually they have responsibilities to each other. So encourage them to have maybe a virtual coffee, maybe a virtual lunch or virtual beers. Actually, a Friday beers online can be a really nice way to do it. You say at 5 o'clock, it's down tools, grab the beverage of your choice, and if people just want a glass of water, that is absolutely fine. And let people banter. How's your week been? what's been good, what hasn't worked, what you're up to over the weekend, all those sorts of things, all the sort of chatter that would normally happen in an office environment. You need to help them recreate that. Just be aware, if you are working with an international team, that one person's beers is another person's breakfast coffee, and behave accordingly. But make sure that those people who are working overseas are included. And it may be that every now and again you change. So one week you might have a breakfast, so that people in other time zones, actually for them it's beers, and vice versa. So a bit of FaceTime is good. Make sure that you're seeing people and that you are actually chatting face-to-face with your remote team. So that was point 5. Let's move on to point 6. Don't expect your team to be online constantly. Just because you like firing off text messages at 8 o'clock in the morning, or you want to be able to just email the whole time, or you're on Instant Messenger or WhatsApp the whole time, doesn't mean your staff need to be. And that's something that a lot of leaders struggle with. They feel that their team should be available the whole time. There should be constant communication going back and forth. But you need to allow 2 things. A, you need to allow downtime. You need to allow people who are working remotely to take the same breaks as people who might be in an office. In fact, quite frankly, you need to allow your people in the office to take breaks as well and ensure they are. Downtime's important. It's important because it allows for much more free-form conversation. It's not work-related. It allows for relationship building, but it also allows for people to recharge, to empty their brains a bit, to come back refreshed. So you need to allow downtime. The other thing, though, you need to allow people is work time. When you are thinking about getting in touch with a member of your team, sending them an email, dropping them a message on WhatsApp, however it is, just put yourself in the frame of mind that they are in the middle of a really vital piece of work that they are doing for you, something you asked them to do. Do you really need to interrupt them? Should you interrupt them? Or actually, could your message wait a while they finish that vital piece of work? So just think about, do I need to send this now? It might be that if you sent it at the end of the morning, when people are going into their lunch break, or you send it at the end of the day, or the beginning of the day, that actually it will allow people blocks of work time. It's very easy for remote teams to just constantly interrupt each other, because in an office you might look up and you can see that somebody is hard at work, or they've taken themselves away somewhere quiet to work. You can't do that remotely. So just work on the assumption they're doing vital work, that you shouldn't interrupt them. And encourage the use of do not disturb on Slack, on other channels, on WhatsApp. You encourage them to turn off notifications, but then agree times when everybody is going to be available to chat. Maybe you're all going to come online, join a Zoom meeting, whatever. Beginning of the day, end of the day would be great times to do it. And allow the conversation to flow. But ensure that that is work time. This is not about expecting people at their break times to then have the communication between colleagues. If you like, think of that as their communication between friends. Communication between colleagues happens on work time, and you've got to make time in the working day for them to do that. So that's point 6. Don't expect people to be online all the time. Although actually, I'm just going to add to that. I'm just thinking about this. A couple of other points, I think, just on this before I move on. If you do need something done by a certain time, you need to explain exactly what that deadline is and why it's important. So if you do need somebody to send you a certain document or to review something by a certain time, I would send them an email or a message saying, I'm going to need this by 4 p.m. because I need to get it to the client by close of business, or because I've got to present it to the board tomorrow morning, or whatever. So give them a deadline and tell them why. So often people say, I need this by 4 o'clock this afternoon, and it feels arbitrary. I think if you can say, I'm going to need it by 4 o'clock because ... then I think you'll get a better response, and people are more likely to respond to that deadline because they can understand the bigger picture. That's what it's really about. And actually, the other one is don't expect instant decisions when you are using chat servers in particular. Instant messaging services are not great meeting spaces. They're good conversation spaces. And I suppose I'm thinking particularly of WhatsApp here. There's a problem if people start chatting and trying to make decisions in places like WhatsApp, it becomes groupthink. One person will come up with an idea and everybody will go, oh yes, that's good. And suddenly that's the decision. Whereas if you were in a meeting space, Zoom meeting, or even in a physical meeting room, actually the conversation, you might interrogate that idea more, examine it, critique it. Other ideas might come in, you can build those ideas together. So just be aware that online chat is not a great place for making decisions. It's not a place to have meetings. Set up a meeting room on Zoom and do it there. Keep online chat for other conversations. So just another point. So yeah, I just wanted to update point 6 on that one. So let's move on to point 7. Have different channels of communication for different purposes. Now, I think that you need to start to differentiate between the multitude of different communication channels that most businesses and organizations have these days. The problem is, if people don't associate certain channels with certain types of communication, it becomes much easier for them to ignore. So, I mean, for example, it's been interesting. I'm aware now, for me, if somebody wants to get a quick response at me, if they send me an instant message, a WhatsApp message, Facebook Messenger, whatever, I probably respond to it faster than I do if somebody sends me an email. Email has sort of dropped down my priority list at the moment because instant messenger is right there. It's much faster. So I think you need to have clear channels for different things. So, for example, if people see an email come into their inbox from the team leader, from the boss, they know that this is going to be an important announcement. Whereas if something comes up on, let's say, a WhatsApp group, they know it's going to be a more discursive point. So think about differentiating different channels. And as I said earlier, for example, WhatsApp, not great for meetings. Zoom, much better for meetings. Have different spaces for different functions and different types of messaging so that people know what to expect when they go into certain types of channels. In the same way that if somebody, if you walk to the coffee bar or the water cooler with somebody, you'd have a very different conversation with them in an office than you would if you actually sat down in a meeting room, for example, which tends to be much more formal. I think chat systems are brilliant. Slack, Microsoft Teams, whichever one you're using, there are a number of them around. I think they're great. I would suggest having a number of different channels, partly so people can opt in and out of the ones they need to be part of. They can monitor some with more urgency than others. And it also just helps to keep conversations separate. Otherwise, conversations get mixed very quickly. By all means, have a general chat channel. But I would have separate channels for separate projects so that different parts of the team can come together to work on those projects. Have a water cooler channel. Have somewhere where people can just gossip, chat, talk about TV, all those sorts of things. I'd also suggest having a sports channel. Otherwise, if you've got a number of sports fans, sports chat can take over a water cooler chat channel very quickly. So I would actually hive off the sports stuff, have a football channel or cricket channel, rugby or whatever, so people can go and talk about that separately. Otherwise, the water cooler one will tend to get a domination. I've seen it happen so many times. I'd also have a channel called something like Boast or Celebrate. And it's a place where people can go in and boast a bit, celebrate their successes. It's great. I've cracked this. This client has just told us how great they think we are. Or I've just lost this amount of weight, or I've just raised this much money. So it can be a personal boast, it can be a professional boast, but it's a really great place for people to celebrate. It really brings people together incredibly quickly. The other channel I would suggest is called something like I need help with ... And it's a place where people can go in and just say, okay, I'm struggling with this. I need help with Zoom, or I need help with this spreadsheet, or I need help with my bike that broke on the outside. People will ask for all sorts of different help. And it's just, again, a great way to start building a cohesive team, people helping each other. And also means that you're fostering a culture of asking for help if people are struggling, which is really important and is actually very difficult to do otherwise in a remote team. I would also then suggest on another channel is email. Use email judiciously. No one needs more emails in their inbox. Goes without saying. I would use emails for announcements, for disseminating news. But if you want to have a discussion, I would go onto a different platform, probably a chat box. I would also say if you are emailing out, if you find yourself emailing more than, let's say, 3 people at a time, is email really the best way to go about it? Would you be better off actually calling a Zoom meeting and disseminating the information the same way? If people start receiving emails with lots of people CC'd or BCC'd, they will realise it's not addressed to them, it's general, it is therefore generic, it is therefore less important. So if you're CCing lots of people on emails, I can guarantee you that actually your communication is going to be less effective. Look at other channels to disseminate the same information. I think also keep your emails short, keep them to the point, bullet point them rather than big blocks of text. And if you need people to respond to certain points, spell that out at the top. Here are the details of this project. What I need is your response to points A, B, and C by 6 o'clock tonight so that I can review them overnight and we can then put the report together tomorrow morning. something like that. So have a really specific call to action. So that's point 7. Have clear and different communication channels for different purposes. So let's move on to number 8. Now, 8 is really just, I want to give you some do's and don'ts around online meetings. Now, nobody really loves meetings, whether they're online or offline. They're a necessary evil. They're a good way to bring people together, disseminate information to a lot of people at once, all that sort of stuff. So, they are a natural part of any business. Couple of things I've already mentioned. Don't use chat rooms for meetings. Use proper meeting rooms like Zoom or a webinar software, for example. And if you are doing a big meeting, maybe you're doing a big cross-company meeting, look at the chat settings, and you can restrict the chat settings to people so they can only respond to everybody. What you don't want are lots of separate little meetings setting up and people running a little back channel and chatting or gossiping or bitching or whinging or whatever. So I would look at your meeting settings when you've got everybody in one room, and you want everybody to be able to hear everything rather than dispersing off into other conversations. Make sure you have an agenda. Make sure it's an appointment in people's diary. Send them a diary invite. And on the whole, with an online meeting, if you can keep it to 15 or 20 minutes, I think you're going to be serving your team much better. There's an awful tendency for meetings to get long, to get bloated. They don't follow the agenda. Short and sharp. And part of that is setting an outcome in advance, and then again restating it at the beginning of the meeting. By the time you finish meeting, we need to know this. We need to have decided that. Have a really clear desired outcome, and I think that will set the meeting up to be much more succinct and much more focused and much more successful. I'd also question, do you need to have another meeting? Is the meeting the right channel? Could this be achieved in a better way? Could you have? Would this be better on chat channel? Would this be better as just an announcement in an email? When you do have an online meeting, I would follow up in writing, particularly if there are agenda points, action items, that sort of thing, things that people have committed to doing. So I would just send out an email listing them afterwards. Just say, these are the things that people have agreed. And again, you're checking that people have understood and agreed to things the way that you understood them. Sometimes there can be a mismatch. People go, sorry, I hadn't realised I'd said that. And it might be that you had actually decided you wanted that person to do it. They hadn't actually said they were going to do it. So a follow-up email or another document, maybe a Google Doc, allows you to capture that, lay it all out so people know exactly what's expected of them. So that's point 8. Meetings, few do's and don'ts. No one needs another meeting. I think that's what I'd just say. Keep them to a minimum, keep them short. So let's move on to point 9. Bear with me, we've only got one after this. We're almost there. I think you should be looking at some of the tools. There are hundreds of tools that are around to help keep track of your team. Now, this isn't necessarily about monitoring performance, but just keeping tabs on how your team are feeling, how they're doing, what's their mood, what's their state of mind. Check in with them about how they feel. And actually, that can give you a huge insight into why things are or aren't happening. One of the tools I just thought I'd mention is this. This is the Nico calendar. And this tracks the mood of your team. Now, it was invented in 2005 by somebody in Fujitsu, because Nico means smiling in Japanese, which I think is lovely. Because what this does is you have a line for each member of the team. This can be as high-tech or as low-tech as you want, quite frankly. Certainly at the end of the day, some businesses do it at the beginning and end of the day. Everybody marks with a smiley how they're doing. So a lot of people will use 3 or 4 gradations. Typically, there might be, I've had a great day, I've had a good day, I've had a so-so day, or I've had a horrible day. Now, this is not a monitoring tool at all and should not be used as such. This is a check-in tool. This is a way to, it's a litmus test, if you like, of how your team are feeling. And you should encourage honesty, but you should also encourage people to explain why they've had a great day or maybe not such a great day. And because a great day might have a number of reasons. It might be that they've had a big client win or they've put a project to bed. It might simply be that the weather's been lovely and they're just in a really good mood. And conversely, if they say they've had a horrible day, it might be that they have struggled to get a piece of work done because they feel they don't have the support they need. Or it might just be that they're feeling a bit under the weather or they've been a bit cold sat at their desk. So it's one of those things where it allows people to check in with each other. You will start to get a feel for the mood of the team, and you do not pick people up if they've had a bad day necessarily. It's not that you go in every single day and say, oh, okay, I can see you've had a bad day. Why? What can I do? But look for trends. look for patterns. If you've got a swathe of teams having bad days, or always, if you've got lots of people having great days, but you've got lots of people having great days and one or two people having not bad days, what's going on there? Why is that? It's about the team dynamics, not necessarily about the individuals. So there are a couple of ways you can do this. If you're in a physical office, this can be a poster on the wall and people actually stick stickers on it. People love it. And actually having a team gathered around it to put up their sticker and saying, I've put up my so-so day sticker because, is a really lovely way to signal it's the end of the working day and brings things to a close. If you're working as a remote or dispersed team, then I think you're clearly going to do it online. There are lots of tools to do it, but maybe have an associated Slack channel or have a Zoom meeting for people to add that explanation. Without the explanation of why they've had that type of day, it's far, far less powerful. But I think it's a really interesting tool as a way of just checking in, keeping a tabs on it, and you should take part as well as leader. We recognise that we all have so-so and terrible days. It happens to all of us. We can't all have good days every single day. But it's an opportunity to be honest and open and explain why things are the way they are. So that's point 9. Look for tools to help to keep track of your team. So final point. Well done for sticking with me for this long. And the final point is quite simple. Do something different. Don't get stuck in a rut. Change things up a bit. Keep it fresh. It keeps it fresh for you, quite frankly. It keeps it fresh for your team and will keep your communication much more effective. If you're just doing the same thing week after week or day after day, people will start to ignore it very quickly. It becomes part of the furniture, if you like. So look and think about what you can change. So for example, you could change the channel. If you always send a weekly, so let's say an end of week email with a roundup, could you do that face to face? Do it on camera. Send it a video. If you are always having meetings, a good way to change those up, because obviously if you're doing them offline, you can change venue, you can change the layout of the room. Online, that's trickier, but I would suggest have a rolling host. So if you have a weekly meeting or a daily meeting, each time you have a meeting, another member of the team hosts that meeting. And it might be they call on the people who are going to speak, who are going to present, and they will share questions and things. And that should include the most junior people in the team right up to the most senior. It's a great way for people to get to know their colleagues, great way for people to raise their profile within the team. And it also gives people that sense of responsibility that every now and again, this meeting is in their control. So having a rolling host is a really nice way to change up meetings. But any type of communication, change the frequency, change the routine, give it a bit of personality. For example, if you always send out an email for a particular type of communication, or you always post on Slack or WhatsApp, maybe add an image or a GIF, even a video. Just a different way to say things, just to liven up, to make it stand out. Because if every week you just send out a text-only update and suddenly this week has a GIF, people are going to notice that and they go, well, that's different, that's new, that's changed. And they're going to re-engage with it in a way, whereas otherwise it's just like, oh, this comes out here, I know what it's going to say, it's always the same. So think about ways you can change it up. Keep it engaging, keep it fresh. So thank you for bearing with me this long. I hope that's been helpful. As I said at the beginning, these won't all apply to every organization. Think about the things that you can take and freshen up in the way you communicate with your dispersed team. Think about the language, think about the channels, think about listening, think about what's causing noise and interference. Think about how you're actually building rapport with your team, how you're allowing some personality into it. Because if you can keep your communications fresh and effective, your business will benefit in the long term. And let's face it, that's what it's all about. Now, if you've got any questions about this, you want to go into more detail, you want to chat it through, or if obviously you'd like me to come in and work with your business, you can check me out on getyourvoiceheard.co.uk. You can find me on LinkedIn or Twitter. I'm Steve Bustin. Actually, on Twitter, I'm at Silicon Brighton. You can drop me an email, steve@getyourvoiceheard.co.uk, and I'm on the usual platforms. So I'm always open to, let's have a virtual coffee, should we say, have a chat, and very happy to answer your questions. So thanks for watching this far. Really hope you've been able to donate to the NHS, because it's, quite frankly, it needs all the money you can get at the moment, all the help. So hope that's been helpful. Hope your communications are good, and on to the next speaker.